Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're actually going to get started in just 1 minute. So thanks, everyone, for being here today. We're just giving people an opportunity to join. Okay, as people are joining, we're going to get started in just 1 minute. I just want to give people a little opportunity to hop on. Thank you so much for joining our panel today. We're so excited to have you all here. All right. As people are joining, what I'm going to do, first of all, hi everyone. I'm Emily Grossman. I direct the CBC Training Institute, and I'm so excited to be here today to have this wonderful panel on Pathway Home presented by CBC. Before we get started, I just want to let you all know that you should see a Q&A box. Basically what we're going to do is if you have any questions during the panel, I'm going to try to monitor them, but we will definitely get to them by the end of the presentation, if not during. So please type them in the Q&A box as opposed to typing them in the chat box. So I want to give a brief introduction of the panel, and then I'm going to let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves. So in the work we do in the behavioral health sector, we serve people across the city and with varying needs. We have a universal wish to see them do well, have the support they need, and lead productive and meaningful lives. However, our work with them is often only through the eyes of the program at which we work. We know of other community programs like ACT, Health Homes, PROS, clubhouses, and refer to them often, but don't really know what they do. What is their program model? Why do they serve some people and not others? What roles do various staff members play? Today, we have an opportunity to explore one community program that over the past 6 years has successfully grown from a grant-funded pilot to 15 teams across New York City serving various populations. Pathway Home is a multidisciplinary intensive care management approach that supports people as they transition from an institutional environment to the community. We are fortunate today to have on our panel 4 Pathway Home veterans who wear 4 different hats, but whose roles are equally important to the success of the program participants. So I'm thrilled to have this Pathway Home panel today to discuss this very important program and all the incredible work that's being done. So I want to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. We're going to start with Mark.
Hi, good afternoon all. My name is Mark Graham. For those who don't know me, I'm Vice President of Program Services at Coordinated Behavioral Care. And in some ways, I'm the grandfather of Pathway Home, because I came to CBC 6 years ago to set up the first pilot Pathway Home project. So it's really an honor to be here today to talk through this program and to share this platform with my colleagues.
Thank you so much. Let's go next to Barry.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Barry Granick. I am a Senior Director at Coordinated Behavioral Care. I joined CBC 5 years ago to work with Mark to expand the Pathway Home teams to where we are today. And it's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues and with everyone that's participating. And thank you, Emily, for sharing this.
Thanks so much, Barry. Okay, now we're going to move on to Alethea.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Alethea Glave. I work with Pathway Home through Institute for Community Living, which is one of the subcontractors. I am currently the team leader of that program. I've been here almost 6 years myself, starting as a clinician on the team to support clients. And I'm also honored to be here and talk with you all about our program.
Thank you so much, Alethea. And now we're going to introduce Edward.
Hello, I'm Edward O'Dowd. I'm a certified peer specialist with the Community Access Pathway Home team. I entered the field 2 years ago and love my new direction.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Edward. And thank you all for introducing yourselves. So I think we're going to start with some questions. And this first question is directed towards Mark. So Mark, can you tell us a little bit about what Pathway Home is and what sort of care it provides?
Sure. So at its most, I suppose, basic level, Pathway Home is a care transition program. And by that, I mean it supports, and it was designed originally to support individuals as they made a transition from an institutional care setting back into the community. And at the time when we started it in 2014, it was a pilot project. We received funding from a grant called a Balancing Incentive Payment Grant, which enabled us to set up 2 programs and to use those programs over the course of a year to support the transition of 150 people from state psychiatric centers as they return back into the community. And some of the importance and of why, and actually I believe we were awarded the grant, was that historically individuals coming from state psychiatric centers did not do well when they returned to the community. So whilst they had received treatment in the hospital setting and discharge plans were put in place to connect them with supports when they returned into the community, all too often people would return, be set up in housing, and within a month or 2 months would find themselves back in a state psychiatric center. And so part of it, like if you see like a little bit like a puzzle, was to find out what's the missing piece. Because New York is very rich in resources, and we have a lot of different forms of programming and clinics and outpatient treatment, but something was amiss for those individuals. And so at Pathway, we really tried to sort of see what was that and how we could change the way the care delivery was being offered. And, you know, there was a lot of supports in place, but there was something a little different that needed to be added. And I think that is what we tried to do with the Pathway Home model. The program itself is, as I say, a care transition model. And some of what we will talk through today are some of those sort of guiding principles that what make it up as a model. And part of that is everything from starting to engage with people prior to discharge from hospital to being a steady role in their life when they return back into the community, from the day of discharge through to the first 2 to 3 months that they are in the community to ensure that they have the supports that they need in order to be successful. And so the Pathway model is a 9-month model. It works with people over a period of time, starting with a very intense engagement. And then over the course of our work with them, we pull back as they become more independent in their community. So that's a very sort of high overview summary. And, you know, sometimes I would just add at the end, there's a thought sometimes like, oh, you know, what is it? Like there must be sort of real complex elements to a model to make it successful. And I think something that we found with Pathway Home, it's almost a little bit back to basics. It's about spending time with folks, giving people quality time in the community so that they can develop trusting relationships with the frontline staff, and really recognizing and sort of pinpointing what is important to that person and what their particular needs are going to be. And sometimes I think a model to be successful in community isn't about bells and whistles. It's more about what it is that enables a person to feel connected to that program, that they want to receive the support from that program and are willing to work alongside the peers and the case managers and the social workers on that program.
Thanks so much, Mark. Mark, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question. Why do you feel that there was a need for a Pathway Home model specifically in New York City?
You know, I think, so New York City, as I see it, I've worked in the social work field here for 20 years. And as I said in my introduction, it's kind of rich in resources. There are a lot of programs out there. And you could very easily ask, why is there a need for another case management program? or care coordination program, when we have, and back in 2014, there were ACT services across the city, assertive community treatment. If you're not familiar with them, there were intensive care coordination programs. There are health home programs across the city for those who don't need as much intensity as ACT perhaps offers. But I think something like for someone like myself who'd been in the field a while, recognize that while sort of health home care coordination and ACT care coordination worked for certain individuals and is certainly they're both very beneficial programs, there were a number of individuals who were falling through the cracks. And I think there's a recognition at the time that, one size doesn't fit all. And that we really need to be able to have sort of like an a la carte choice of care coordination services in our communities so that we're connecting people to the right support services that they need. And so while we'll be talking about Pathway, you'll hear from, I'm sure, Ed and Alethea about some of the successes that they've had, but not everyone needs the Pathway level of intervention. Some are very adequately served through our colleagues in health home care coordination. But I think what and why there was a need was for those individuals who were falling through the cracks, and particularly those who were coming out of hospital systems and not succeeding in the community or building on the stability they had found in the hospital when they returned to the community. And I think that was the sort of like the key that needed to be looked at and addressed so that those folks would get the services and the supports that they needed in their community.
Thanks, Mark. So this next question we're going to gear towards Barry. So Barry, Pathway Home is modeled on and adapted from a number of evidence-based interventions. What interventions influence the Pathway Home model, and how does this impact the intervention of the Pathway Home model today?
Thank you, Emily, for your question. What we looked at when creating the Pathway Home model is to look to see what other models are out there so that we can incorporate some of these really wonderful theories or conceptualizations. And so when you think about person-centered care, harm reduction, recovery orientation, and incorporating all the shared decision-making as well, incorporating all those theories and ideas was really important. The two that I want to focus in on and describe more at length are the ones that are slightly less well known. The first one is critical time intervention. Critical time intervention is an evidence-based model, and what it does is emphasize intensive care in the community really at this critical time when an individual makes a transition from one healthcare setting to another. So in the case of Pathway Home, you may think of transitioning from a hospital setting to a community healthcare setting. And what CTI, or critical time intervention, otherwise known as CTI, does is that over the course of a 9-month phased model, the intensity of the program is slowly reduced, so that initially an individual receives many visits, up to 2 to 3 or more times a week. And as they become more independent and better connected to the care, the services are slowly reduced. And CTI has now been utilized in a variety of different settings, including those moving from homeless shelters to housing, from hospitals to housing or other locations in the community. And so we're very much modeled on critical time intervention. The other important theory that I think I want to just emphasize, since it's either not as well known or not as well incorporated into many of the programs, is the importance of peer support. And what I mean by peer support is including in the multidisciplinary team individuals with a shared living or shared lived experience. And what the research has indicated so far is that, as well as our experience, is that those with a shared lived experience are better able to engage members. And really help improve relationships with outpatient providers. And hopefully we can talk more about that a little bit later of how specifically we've done that. Before I end, what I would like to say is really Pathway Home is a unique program in and of itself. We've incorporated many of these conceptualizations and theories, yet it is also, at this point, 6 years in, a developed structure. We have a method of functioning, and it's really independent of many of these other programs. So it's almost like we've taken them all in, thought about thoughtfully how to incorporate them, and then sort of came up with this other conceptualization called the Pathway Home program.
I would just add to that Barry and I have a boss who would very much clearly say that what Pathway Home has become is a practice-based intervention. That through the practice and the work that Ed and Alethea and their teams do, they have incorporated new features that make it a very unique model and a standalone model. And so while there is the influence of CTI and strengths-based models, motivational interviewing, and other components, there's a uniqueness now in the 6 years that has really got a CBC or a Pathway Home as a stamp on. And I think it's important to recognize the uniqueness of this program at the same time as recognizing how it was influenced.
Thanks. Mark, did you want to jump in and talk a little bit about CBC's role with Pathway Home?
Sure, so I work for CBC, Coordinated Behavioral Care. If you're not familiar with it as an agency, we are a membership organization in that we were formed by 50 odd nonprofit organizations in the city of New York. And one of the big pushes behind that was to become a behavioral health IPA. And Pathway Home allowed us for the first time to really develop a unique program or grant, and then to work alongside our member agencies in the implementation. So at the CBC side of it, we, or myself, when it was first started, really worked on developing the model. And we are, if you will, like the emperor in the Wizard of Oz behind the machine, that we develop the model, we provide all the administrative, technical background assistance, but the frontline work is delivered by one of our member agencies. And Alethea works for ICL, who were one of the first, and SUS was the other first agency. And Ed works for Community Access. And so when we get new Pathway Home programs, essentially all of the legal administrative stuff is done at CBC. And then we subcontract to a member, a community-based organization to deliver the care in the community. And what the niceness, the uniqueness behind that is that Alethea and Community Access and Ed and people don't have to worry about any of the contracting side of it. They don't have to worry about the electronic health record. They don't have to worry about quality oversight and insurance. That is all taken care of at the CBC level, giving them more time to work with the individuals that they serve. For me, what's been really nice is the ability to collaborate and for agencies to interface more with each other. And so whilst we're all in the behavioral health field, in the past, a lot of it was siloed. And so I worked for an agency and I wouldn't know that ICL were right next door to me and that they were doing similar services or what supports they have. And so through the CBC IPA network, we're all in this together and we can tap into each other's resources and other programming. But at the level with Ed at Community Access, again, Alethea at ICL, we're almost like one big sort of Pathway Home family. Pre-COVID, we would come together like once or twice a year as a Pathway Home program, bringing people from different agencies so that we could learn from each other. We could understand what their experiences have been with the Pathway Home population that they're serving and what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, and then to be able to tap into each other so that we could use each other as resources. And one of the things that Pathway Home does now, even in this COVID time, is by discipline. So there's a peer meeting, there's a team leaders meeting of all of the, I think it's now 9 different agencies that run Pathway Home teams, and the staff come together by discipline, and we're able to, again, sort of share from our experiences how best to serve the individuals that we serve.
Great, thanks, Mark. So I see that we had a question come in, and I am going to wait till closer to the end to ask this question. But I do want to remind folks that if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box, and we will get to them for sure before the end of the presentation. So thank you so much for all your questions in advance. Okay, so the next question I have is, what are the guiding, and this is for all of you, but I think we'll start with Edward on this one. What are the before we started, before we began preparing for this presentation, or during our preparation really, we talked about some guiding principles of Pathway Home. Things like person-centered care, immediate needs assessment, linking to community resources, self-efficacy and self-determination, early engagement, and many others. So I was hoping that each of you would take your favorite one, or one that's important to you, and would talk about this guiding principle and why it's so important. So I think we're going to start with Edward on this one. And Edward, you're muted.
I chose early engagement because, to me, this is one of the most, one of the most powerful aspects of the program, is the idea that we're developing relationships with participants before they even leave the hospital, and developing a sense of trust so that when they're discharged, they're more often than not discharged to us, unless they have a family member or somebody else they want. But in most cases, it comes to us, and that trust is already built. They're not coming out of the hospital like to somebody they've never met before. There's already been a relationship set into place. And an example I wanted to give of that was a young girl that I worked with a lot last year, who nobody could really engage. They tried, I mean, many tried, and she was just resistant. And she and I met, and within 10 minutes, we were best friends. It just so happened that I knew about things that she liked, and she thought nobody would know about things she liked. I have a son her age, so she started talking about this band and that band, musical acts. And, I said, well, I know that person, or I've been to that club. And suddenly she was completely trusting because somebody spoke her language. So that's my example of early engagement.
Yeah, what a wonderful example, and how great that you were able to engage her around something that was so interesting to her. I think we're going to go next to Alethea. Alethea, what's your guiding principle that you wanted to talk about?
Thanks, Emily. I would probably want to talk about conversational assessment. I've found, I've been doing this for a while and working at other places, and I'm sure all of you can relate. A lot of times when you're meeting with clients and you have to do an assessment, there's a lot of paperwork involved. There's a lot of focus on checking boxes and checking off which diagnosis. And we found that Pathway Home to kind of just put that to the side and forget about that while you're, like Ed said, engaging with the person and just talking to them one-on-one. And as long as that takes you to get the information you need to put in your assessment, that's something that can be done, because a lot of clients, they're used to going into an office and answering questions again and again, and people get tired of that. And it doesn't seem as genuine. And we found that when you just speak to people on that one-on-one level, they're much more willing to open up. They're much more willing to start that trusting process, telling you what they need, and not being relegated to, this is who I am on paper. Because like myself, going into hospitals, I've met with clients, and you ask them, tell me about yourself. Tell me who you are. And the first thing is, well, I have bipolar disorder, or I have schizophrenia. And you get to kind of rework that with them and say, well, that's not who you are, by just conversing with them. And so that for me is one of the biggest parts, as well as the flexibility of our model and our program, how we operate. I think because we're not, bogged down by how often I have to see someone or how long I need to spend with them, we get to cater each visit to the individual's needs. And we're flexible with, how soon we can go meet someone, how often, even the hospitals, how soon we get back to them when they say, hey, we need your help. the flexibility aspect is very huge because we get to determine with the client, what their needs are and how to move forward throughout the 9 months that we're working with them.
Wonderful, wonderful. Such important work. We're going to go now to Mark.
Of course I was on mute, and I said to myself, no, I must press that button before. Yeah, mine is a little bit, I suppose, of a build on to what Ed and Alethea said, and I'm just going to sort of start with where you were at. Something that was very important, I think, when we started Pathway Home was the hospital engagement that Ed talked about, and ensuring that we saw people at least ideally twice before they were discharged to the community. And part of where we built our conversational assessment around that Alethea mentioned was that we had, those of us who were started the program had past experience where we have to go to hospitals with multiple assessment forms. And the assessment form itself, you had to get people to sign things, and you were asking them about their substance use, you were asking about their sexual, if they'd been sexually assaulted on a first meeting where they didn't know you from Adam. And to me, they became a barrier between you as the worker and them, and it created a structure that it was like, this is about very sort of programmatic, automated questions as opposed to getting to know you. And I think that's really like where Ed talks about bands and stuff like that. I think you can get the information you need for assessment forms and stuff at later dates or in past assessments that were completed in a referral packet, and spend time getting to talk about bands if that's what the person wants to speak about. And so mine sort of principle would be the immediate needs assessment. And where we take this from is, again, the hospital setting. The Pathway Home model strives to be there on day of discharge, so that when you're coming out of the hospital, there is a member of the team to take you home, wherever that home might be, whether it's staying with a relative, whether it's your own apartment, whether it's returning to family or supportive housing. We want to be there. And part of the reason for that is that we can see what you need as soon as you return into the community. We all know readmission rates are very high in the behavioral health field. And back to my sort of first question was like, we sort of wonder why. And some of it stems from lack of food, stems from basic human needs that a person might have when they return home. And so like, I mean, Alethea and I were talking before, and she reminded me of an example of someone that she went to take home from a hospital on a December day, and it was a snowstorm in the city, and she was getting there to get him home before the blizzard really hit. And as she walks out of the hospital, she looks and she realizes he's wearing sandals. It's like flip-floppy sandals. And he had no boots, he had no proper clothing for the weather, given where he had come from when he arrived back in the city. And so she was able to immediately purchase, go to a shoe store and buy him boots, buy him socks, so that that immediate need was met for him. In the same way, I've met with individuals who have taken home, and you find that the apartment's rat infested. There's rodents, there's bed bugs, there's things that can impact someone's stability in the community that when you see them firsthand, you can address. And so our immediate needs assessment is really done on that day when a person returns to the community. And it's done in a way through observation. You're observing how that person is functioning in the community. Are they able to buy groceries for themselves? Are they able to communicate with people within their building? Do they have the supplies and supports that they need in their apartment? Do they need help getting medication filled? Is there bucket loads of medication on their dining room table that needs sorting because some of them are old meds and they're unsure of what is their current medication? And I think that's what we, in each of our Pathway Home teams, strives to do, is to recognize what that immediate need is, with the ultimate goal of addressing it. And I think we're going to talk a little later, that we are fortunate to have a lot of support dollars, if you will, behind this, wraparound funds, so that we can meet those needs in order for them to remain stable and safe in their home environment.
Yeah. So it really sounds like, Mark, it's the kind of thing where it takes out the check boxes and makes it a much more human process.
Yeah, a personal approach.
Personal.
And we often talk about person-centered planning in our work, and I think, again, as a social worker for 20 years, I think I was very well intentioned at times, but I was a little sort of caught up in paperwork and documentation and regulation. And where you really want to be person-centered is hearing the person and listening to that person and really what is uniquely their challenges in the community, as opposed to sort of the boxes as you tick, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Barry, we'll go to you. Tell us about a guiding principle that really makes sense and is important to you.
Yeah, the guiding principle that makes sense to me and most important and what I'm most passionate about is what we call self-efficacy and responsibility. And in many ways, it continues to build on Edward and Alethea and Mark's comments. They really talk about the front end of the work, which is, as I've already described, the emphasis. The earlier on in the program, the more intense it is. But a question we get consistently is, okay, well, this is a 9-month program. How do you get to that place where individuals are able to graduate from the program? And there's some qualities of a time-limited program, including the rapid assessment, early engagement. I would also add selective selection, specific selection criteria, right? Finding the right people for this program, as well as something that I call individual choice, which is we ask people, are you interested in Pathway Home? Is this what you want to do? In other words, we're a voluntary program. From just researching our own activities, what we found is when we ask people if they're interested, they tend to actually be more interested versus a more coercive approach. But to the point is that when we start the actual work, we know that there are prescribed healthcare tasks, and there's a time limit. The time is ticking. And so what we try to really emphasize from the very beginning is that everything that we do, we're providing skill building. We're teaching the individual, how are they going to be able to do this themselves? And so I'll give an example or two. When we, one of the prescribed healthcare tasks is taking someone, or accompanying individuals to their initial appointments. Well, what we don't do is say, hey, your appointment's today, as we knock on the door, follow me. Rather, what we do is we say, we're here today. Do you know why? Hopefully they say, I have an appointment. We say, great, you have an appointment. Show us the way. And we sort of metaphorically follow them. And if at any point there's a hiccup, we tap them on the shoulder. We say, actually, it's not this bus. It's that bus, right? The purpose of all this is to teach people how to do things for themselves and become autonomous in their own care. And what I will say in regards to what our staff, how they approach this is, one, optimism. Our staff believe in the members that we serve and believe that they're capable of getting to that place in only 9 months, period, or less. And the other is, because they're so optimistic, is they set a graduation date, which almost forces us to ensure that we teach the individual everything they will need to know to be able to graduate, or put something in place that supports that individual.
Yeah, and I can only imagine how empowering that is to the individuals that are being served. So I think that's a wonderful one to highlight. Thanks, Barry. Okay, so these next questions are for Alethea and for Edward. So Pathway Home teams have unique features such as smaller rosters and wraparound funds. Can you talk about examples, Alethea and Edward, of how you've used wraparound funds? So Alethea, let's start with you, and then we'll jump to Edward. And maybe talk about what a wraparound fund is and all of that.
Sure. So we, like Mark was mentioning earlier, wraparound funding is something we're fortunate to have. And it's something that we can use for clients to get them things that they need or to assist with, goals like socialization, or if they have educational goals and they don't have the appropriate funds to be able to spend on that. Wrap funding is something that we're allowed to use in those cases. It's not like, oh, we just have several $100s and we're just going to give it out to each client. There's usually intention behind it. There's a reason, there's a justification. And so we go through that with each person to see if there are things that they need or could benefit from. So that could be anything from immediate needs, like we talked about with like needing to buy someone shoes or groceries. But what I really like about wrap funding is the creativity that we have. And it could be something as small as, for instance, a client that I had years ago who struggled with expressing her emotions. I did what I call cinema therapy. I took her to see a movie called Inside Out. For those of you who don't know it, you should look it up. It's a Pixar movie, and it's about the emotions that you experience, like how those develop. And in taking her to see that movie and conversations afterward, she was able to say, maybe even if it was just the color of that particular emotion, this is what I'm feeling right now. And it led to us to be able to have conversations about those emotions and, helped us in our time together. Or it could be something more elaborate where we've done, in my case, what I call self-soothe kits with clients. And that's when you get little items that the client may want that relates to each of the 5 senses. And we all know what those are. And you create a little kit. And when they're very stressed or anxious or a lot is going on, you can go back to that little kit and self-soothe. That's what I call it, self-soothe kit. And so wrap funding is just something that to me is so amazing. It can be something super small or to what a client might say is large to them. What might seem like very simple to me, I've had clients say, oh my gosh, I've never gone out to eat before. And it's like, that's something we do every day. That's normalized. And the fact that people express those things, it's like, okay, well, let's get you in a restaurant. You want to learn how to order from a waiter? Let's do that, and the creativity, that aspect of it is just unreal. And I'm sure Edward has tons of examples as well.
Yeah. Alethea, I want to say, I think you coined a term, cinema therapy. I've not heard of that before. Hopefully they'll develop a program for that at NYU so that people can start giving cinema therapy, and you'll be the teacher. All right, so I want to turn over to Edward. Edward, talk a little bit about your experiences with wraparound funds.
Well, so the overarching, phrase would be, creativity, right? In finding and discovering and collaborating with people what their interests are, what their previous passions were. Do they have new passions? Do they want to try something different? Do they want to stay the same? Whatever. I mean, it's the ability to have wraparound funds has made it so that, if somebody's musical, but they can't afford an instrument, we can buy them an instrument. I can teach them to use it. We've put people in lessons, shy people in singing lessons who want to express themselves. Gym memberships have been, critical for keeping people well. And I physically will go and work out with them, which makes a huge difference. That there's, it's a collaboration. It's not just I'm being sent to the gym by myself to get well. This has also, enabled me to do things like hydrotherapy with people, where it's amazing. It's an amazing, amazing thing to see somebody who's suffering from anxiety or depression enter water. It's a complete transformation. And I've had the great fortune of being able to do it with at least 5 people in the last year and a half. And so that, wonderful things like that, engaging through Zoom because of COVID, we can't swim. But if we can get somebody a laptop or something they can view Zoom on, we can interface with them. So it's all about the creative aspect of it, of how to find somebody's passion.
And Edward, knowing your work, you are just a master. Both you and Alethea are just masters at coming up with the creative side of things. So I think it's wonderful that you guys shared those examples. Thank you so much.
Can I just add, Joe, Emily, to their creativity? I mean, I think it's something that I feel very blessed with the staff on Pathway Home, because people have come up with some incredible ideas, from like the movies and stuff like that to the water therapy and stuff. And I'm sort of inspired by the thinking that folks have, and in ways that they, through that sort of conversational assessment that Alethea talked about, have learned of someone's interest and then found something in the community for that person that really is tailored to that interest. And I think there was someone on one of our Coney Island teams. There's a cat cafe where you can go, and it's like cat therapy and stuff like that for those who can't have their own cats. And so there's just been an array over the 6 years, and so sometimes people go like, well, it's like a freebie and stuff, but it's not. I think the wraparound funds isn't an allocated amount for every participant at Pathway Home. Some people don't get any because they don't necessarily need it, and while others you might spend a couple $1,000s on something, then sometimes the money that you've spent has helped sustain their housing, or the money you've spent doing something has kept them out of a hospital. And so like there's a huge cost saving, and sometimes you just have to pony up a little bit in order to ensure you get that cost saving.
If I could add one thing too, like the purchasing of things, of items like musical instruments or whatever, connecting people to their passions, but also connecting to those passions with them. So I've had many situations where I've had somebody who plays an instrument but doesn't have anybody to play with. So we've gone to the studio because I'm a drummer, so I can do that for them. Mm-hmm. But then, okay, so we've done this. Now, did you know Baltic Street Resource Center has a music section? I say to them, let's go jam with them. You know what I mean? And then they're off and running, and it's just this beautiful thing that happens. It's like connection, and they fly.
Yeah.
You know?
I have to add one more to that, because you say about sharing and doing something, and Alethea might recall this, but when we started, and this was a grant-funded program, and most of you've experienced this, you take people on appointments and you bring them to maybe get their Medicaid reactivated. It takes hours. And so treating someone to lunch and bringing them over to a restaurant for an experience and stuff like that, we used to do that. And the funder of the grant was like, we'll only pay for the person, we're not going to pay for the staff. And the staff weren't looking to have a free lunch, but I was encouraging them to buy lunch with the person because it's breaking bread with someone. And I went back to the folk in Albany and said, by not allowing the staff, you're having a one-sided lunch. And if any of you've ever sat and had someone watch you eat, it's a very awkward, and it makes the relationship unbalanced. And so we used to see it as a sort of a breaking bread, and they agreed. And I think sometimes we don't push hard enough to make those little changes. Like you might have there's a lot of bureaucracy and stuff, but if you actually make a point and explain a reason why, you'll find people perhaps in funding sources are more accommodating. They're going like, yeah, that's logical and it makes sense. And so we were able to do that. And so it's just one of those small little things. So.
Yeah, Mark, what an important thing to advocate for. And it really is, being able to walk with the person, whether it's jamming with them with an instrument or breaking bread with them. So how incredible. I want to turn over to, let's see, Barry, what is unique about Pathway Home's multidisciplinary approach?
Well, just to give some background, the Pathway Home teams are multidisciplinary, which means that there is a mix of licensed clinicians, care managers, peers, and registered nurses on each one of our teams. And each, I think, come with what I think is a diverse and unique expertise and experience. one of the important structured features of Pathway Home is the weekly meeting. And this is an opportunity at least once a week for the whole team to get together. And what they actually do is most teams meet on Monday morning and they plan their week. And what we often see happen is that there's this collaboration where they're talking about a unique need of an individual. And if it's on the medical side, the staff can go to the RN and say, hey, can you do a visit with this person this week because, the doctor gave them this advice and they don't understand it. Can you educate them? Or if there's someone whose motivation isn't strong, the staff can go to the peer and suggest that they do something together to address motivation. If there's someone that's having a family issue or a behavioral health crisis, and that they need someone who has experience providing either crisis intervention or short-term counseling, or even collaboration with providers, they can look to the clinician to be able to step in. And so what sort of happens is that you have this really wonderful way of a team working together, each with bringing their own expertise to the table. Though I will say that ultimately each member is assigned one staff member that is their primary staff member, that is the one that sort of sees them through from beginning to end and takes responsibility for their care while pulling in the different other members of the team. And I really look to my colleagues that are out there, Alethea and Edward, to perhaps even give some examples of times where this was really helpful to be able to lean on a staff member that had a different expertise than you may have had.
It's been critical, actually. And as I get deeper into the model and to the work, it's yeah, I mean, I'm really reassured by the fact that if there's, I like to do a lot of things myself, but it's great to know that I can turn to a staff member and say, can you provide this? Or can you guide me through this? Can you help us with this, right? So we're all kind of working in tandem. It is I think it's extremely powerful.
Alethea, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think for me, leading one of the teams and having been one of the people that needed to do that, it's easier for me to see when that's not happening. And because sometimes, like Edward was saying, like you want to do it yourself and you're in that moment, but like me being kind of like outside looking, I can tell and see like, oh, it might be too stressful for this person, or let's ask our peer specialist for some advice. I think with our teams, because we don't have like a lot of big egos in the room, it makes it so much easier to actually collaborate, and you sit down and it's like, hey, that's not okay, let's try it this way. Because we've had, like, my team, one of our peer specialists, she has a saying when we all sit down, and she's like, unfortunately what you guys learned in school is over, like that's not what we're doing right now. And so everyone in the team will stop and go, that's right, like that's not what we're doing, let's focus on the person. And so asking everyone for their expertise has definitely helped us with what we're doing with the clients, just overall, for sure.
Can I just add to that and about the sort of the teamwork that I've seen on some of these Pathway Home teams, and it gets embarrassment. The teams don't meet every day like some care coordination requires, so a lot of the times teams will start their day in the community. And when Alethea and I were first working together, people formed like team text chains, and literally they were going all day. Like I'd be up in Harlem and it's like, I'm here at the moment, I'm going to go over and see John Bean, and someone might say, oh, if you're in that area, I know Bob would really appreciate a visit. And so they were able to just constantly communicate with each other and basically plan their day through texting. Or at a Manhattan Psychiatric Center, oh, if you're there, would you mind seeing so-and-so? And everyone was so sort of accommodating. And I said to people after a while, I was like, do you feel very isolated because you don't meet with your team every day? Because we didn't require people to return to the office to do their notes. They could go home and do their notes. And people were like, no, I feel more connected with these teams because I feel like these folks are just with me all day long. And I know if I need any type of support, they will be there for me. And at the end of the day, the text message used to have people sign out saying like, I'm off for the evening, blah, 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 which enabled them to know everyone was safe, or they just texted safe. And if someone didn't, then the team were like, where are you? And people would not and would go above and beyond to ensure that that person was home safe. And then you realize they just forgotten to send the text and you're like, oh. But I just felt that communication between these teams, that even though they're not physically together, that occurs day in, day out.
It's a real community feel to the team themselves, which is so important. Okay, we're going to turn over to Edward for a moment. Edward, I wanted to talk about you as a peer with lived experience for a moment. And what do you find most impactful about the Pathway Home intervention as a person with lived experience yourself?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because there's a couple of pieces to this, which is the first one being that I was actually received services from Community Access and then got my certification as a peer and came on board. So that was a really interesting, and so, I mean, I have a great relationship with my colleagues because I know them already. The intervention, I have to say, like, if I had known about Pathway Home when I was experiencing my psychiatric hospitalizations, I think my outcome would have been quicker. And I wish I honestly, and so it inspires me to work on it because it's something that I wish that I had when I was having my experiences. So, in that, I strive to be the best peer that I can be, knowing both sides of the wall, as it were. And which I also think is a critical aspect too, is that you can visit somebody in the hospital and say, I've been here. Like, I know I sat where you're sitting. So we already have that simpatico. And 9.5 times out of 10, that works. That's enough to get a connection going.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like speaking the same language as the person in many ways.
It essentially is, because I think what we're finding now is we're getting into homelessness, and like each of these demographics have their own language, and those who have been hospitalized are familiar with a particular kind of language, and knowing that is, I feel, extremely beneficial.
How wonderful that you bring that to your team and to your members as well. Thank you, Edward. Okay, so I want to turn the next question over to Barry. How have you used innovative technology for Pathway Home?
So it's something that's been important to CBC, and we've talked about it in a variety of different settings, is utilizing the technology that exists to help us in our efforts in providing the best possible healthcare. And we feel that if there's a tool out there that the members that we serve deserve the right, the opportunity to be able to be offered that and to have access to it. And so we've incorporated a variety of different types of technology interventions or solutions. At a very basic level, we communicate with people via text or video conference. And I mean, now it's ubiquitous with COVID. I think we're all doing this. We've been doing it for years, which has been really important to help us not replace the face-to-face, but really be in addition to the face-to-face work in those in-betweens. What we've heard from some of our members is that, during the hours of 2 to 4 on a Wednesday afternoon is not when they're in a crisis, right? They're in crisis all sorts of times, and being able to access someone during that time is really critical. And having the video as well allows staff to be able to not just hear, but put their eyes on someone and their environment. To ensure that everyone has the opportunity to connect, we provide phones, smartphones, to all those members that don't have access. We utilize Uber Health and for getting people to and from their appointments. But I really want to focus in on one specific intervention, even though we've used a few, since it's something that I really felt was unique and interesting, which is something called Wealth. And Pathway Home piloted and incorporated what's considered a technology-assisted care solution, but essentially just means it's an application you download on your phone. And what Wealth does is incorporates behavioral economics into healthcare to ensure and help members build lasting healthy habits. So I'm just going to use a very basic example, medication. What Wealth does is that it is, for example, has someone take a picture of their medication in their hands as they're about to take their medication. And for each day that they take their medication, they get paid to do that. And the behavioral economics theory is two things. One is something called intention behavioral gap and present bias. So the intention behavioral gap basically means that if, sometimes we intend to do something, but then we don't actually do it, right? And the present bias means sometimes we have it in front of us, but we choose something else. We have a Snickers bar in our medication, we choose a Snickers bar because it makes us feel good in the moment. And so by incorporating financial incentives, we're sort of combating the Snickers bar versus the diabetes medication. Now someone gets rewarded right now for taking that diabetes medication and has a very similar feeling in the body as taking, eating the Snickers bar. And then it also sort of bridges that gap between intention behavior. I intend to do it. So now it motivates you. Here you have something that sort of tells you, do it now. It gives you a reminder. They do it, they get rewarded. And so we've piloted it with some of our teams, and we've had a lot of success, and even demonstrated already, and that those that use the app have increased attendance in their appointments. Perhaps we think they may want to get their prescriptions because they know then they'll be able to take their medication so that they can achieve the reward.
Yeah, so a lot of very creative ways that technology are being used with Pathway Home, and a lot of really great rewards. So that's wonderful. Okay, the next question I wanted to talk about with Alethea and Edward is really, how do you build relationships with outpatient providers? So let's start with Alethea on this one. How do you build relationships with outpatient providers?
Well, the principle that I tend to use is very similar to, working with members, and it's, we show up, right? And so that's like a common thing that we say. I think a lot of people are not used to how involved Pathway Home, like our type of program, would be. And they're also used to having to do a lot on their own. So showing up and talking about the program and then following through on what we say we can assist with, I think has led people to really go, oh, okay, Pathway Home actually is gonna be here and assist. I think also how quickly we get involved, like very rapidly. When we do that, then the providers tend to respond as quickly, particularly with, like, let's say hospitals, for instance. Our turnaround time is very quick once we receive a referral, and then we get in there and we start working with them. And so they tend to respond to us more quickly. I also like to provide feedback to outpatient providers of like how things are going or have gone, so that they get to say, okay, so this does work. I'll continue to work with Pathway Home. So those are some of the things that I have noticed really work with outpatient providers and building those relationships. Also providing some education. Sometimes, we work with residences and the clients are new to them, and so they're not really sure what to expect, and people are very quick to call 911. And so sometimes just talking them through, what's going on with the client or what to expect or look out for, that does help build a relationship, not only with us and the provider, but then with the residents and the client themselves. So, there's a lot of moving parts, but there's lots of things that we do that assist with that. Ed?
I was going to say, one of the things that, I personally try to provide is resources. And so research and, collecting of various resources that can be used, because a lot of times things will come up and it's like, well, what kind of provider? Nobody knows everything. But the more I build up the resources, the more choices we have. And in terms of building the relationships with the providers once they're had, is that I find more often than not, those that I work with want me to come on a therapy session with them or want me to come to their psych appointment with them. I give them the option. Of course, that's something we move away from as time goes on, but that means I'm meeting the providers. And so there's a face to Pathway Home, right? So somebody's therapist gets to know me, you know what I mean? And then there's a fluid exchange of information. The participant feels more comfortable because they're, being supported, right? And I know their therapist, and so we all know each other. It's all one fluid thing. And I think that's a very important aspect to, time intervention as well, because it's hard to get providers to call back. But when you develop relationships with them, they say, oh, it's Ed from Pathway Home. The call gets picked up. I'm sure you experienced the same, Alethea.
Yeah, and that speaks to the great work that Pathway Home does, absolutely, because the way you guys build relationships creates this unity and breaks down some of the silos that exist in mental health all too often.
And what's interesting too is that I have providers then calling me a lot of times after the fact, asking for advice.
Wow, that's incredible. So I want to go to the final question of the day before we open it up to anyone else's questions. So this is for both Alethea and Mark. Pathway Home is a 9-month model and never has a wait list. How do you successfully end a relationship in 9 months? And how do you know that the model worked? So I think we're going to let Mark weigh in on this one first, and then we'll go over to Alethea.
Yeah, it's I think it was, again, something that was very important to us at the beginning, that we had seen great programs like ACT and stuff, and you would hear, oh, there's a long wait list, there's a long wait list. And I think some of us had experience of working on ACT, and I certainly used to oversee 6 ACT teams, and there were people on those teams who didn't need to be on those teams, who were independent enough that they should have been encouraged to be self-sufficient in the community, but almost we became protective of them as a team, saying, oh, but they wouldn't manage if we weren't there, if we didn't see them 6 times a month, when we didn't give them the dignity to try it, and because we were too protective. And so when we built Pathway, we really wanted it to be that the role was to get that person not just referred to and connected to a community provider, but actively engaged. And so that they became actively engaged in different parts of their community. And some of that might be their treatment provider, some may be in a local food pantry, they might be the volunteer. They may go on to, some of our participants have gone back to college or have completed their college degrees and are now working full time, that people really should be encouraged to lead as independent a life as possible. And I think sometimes we in the behavioral health field, well-meaning as we are, don't allow people to succeed and to move themselves forward. And so we wanted it to be a short-term intervention, but we recognized that this was a cohort who was going in and out of hospital. So really sticking to that sort of 9-month model meant that we had to be very, very present in those first 3 months. But even though we formed, I like to call them sort of professional friendships with people in order to make them, get them connected with the supports they need and to be involved in the program, by month 4, we had to start stepping backwards. and we had to start giving them, allowing them to go to appointments by themselves, and we would perhaps be a safety net and check that they had made it. And to working towards, I think it was Barry or someone said that, an end date, and so that people know when the end is coming. And I teach up at Hunter, and we often, like, when it comes to an end date, there's an anxiety sometimes. Like a client who's done particularly well can feel like, well, I won't be able to succeed when you're no longer there. But if we have done our job at Pathway Home, they've become less and less dependent on us. And it's down to text messaging towards the end, and that they're ready and happy to move forward. And even those who are anxious, it's sharing with them the successes that they've had and helping them recognize the work they put in and how independent they become and why they no longer need us. And when we can get to that, I feel like we've been successful and set out to do what we achieved.
Yeah, so this helping people to become independent is just at the heart of everything you do. Alethea.
Yes, I'd just like to echo. I mean, Mark hit it right on the head with that. I think with us, because we start from the beginning with explaining the program and how things work, and as we go, we're constantly talking about it. And also because we frame it as a graduation. A lot of people talk about termination, discharge, but our clients know off the bat, this is the program you're going to graduate from, which is a positive thing. And so teaching them throughout their time with us, how to say goodbye, because we've had a lot of clients that, feel abandoned. And so, like, how do you reframe that and teach them how to develop their own relationships and say goodbye in a positive manner? That's something that goes really well for us. I mean, I think we could also, look at hospitalization data and how many times someone goes back to the hospital. But I think just looking at the growth of the person, you know when they're ready. And they'll tell you when they're ready. Like Mark is saying, sometimes they'll just step back and it's like, I don't have time to see you today. I'm busy. And it's like, all right, cool. But they give feedback. Our clients tell us when something's working and when it's not working. And so I found that, sitting down toward the end and just really talking about where you were to where you are now, that is a really positive thing. And they let you know, and sometimes they'll write us little notes. It takes me back to a client we had several years ago that at the start, like, everyone was unsure how it was going to go. There was so much going on, and suicidal risk, and the client was selectively mute, and we didn't know what we were going to do. But through persistence and helping her apply for schools and getting back in there, it went from 0 to 100, and we were just amazed. And in her last session with one of my colleagues, she whispered in his ear and said, "Thank you." And we, like, literally everyone was crying after this, because how do you go from someone who you're not sure is going to make it through the next day, and someone who doesn't want to speak, to telling you thank you for the work that you've done with them? For us, it's so rewarding. And like I said, they will let you know. And I really appreciate all the work that we do with our clients and all of my panelists here, for sure.
Can I just add one last thing? That whilst we've had many successes and people like Alethea speaks of, we also recognize there are some individuals who after Pathway need more intensive care. And I think the importance of our role is recognizing that at the 3 or 4 month mark and saying, you know what, this person does need ongoing care, and that's okay. And it's okay, but we need to make sure they get connected to the right supports then that can continue to work after we finish with them. And because you back to the very beginning, everyone's unique and their journey is unique. And some people will need ongoing care in the community. But what I think we're trying to show and demonstrate is that the vast majority don't, and with the right, put them on the right road, and they can be very independent and really take on and succeed in ways that may not have been expected at the beginning.
And it sounds like it's taking mental health out of a cookie cutter where everyone gets the same thing. It's just tailored to the individual. Super. Well, I really want to thank you all so much. I do want to encourage folks to chat in some questions now in the Q&A box if you have any questions. We do have one, and Alethea, I'll connect with you afterwards because this person wants to really connect with you. They work at ICL also. But Xavier says, how do we get the hospitals on board as it relates to alerts within the RMA system when members are hospitalized or during emergency room visits?
I can jump in very first on that. And some of that is about establishing connections with the hospitals. And so just to go, before getting to someone that we might be working with and they know, we wanted to see people, I said, try to strive to see them twice in hospital before discharge. And in New York City Hospital, when we started this, that was really hard because they started thinking of the discharge plan the day before the person's leaving. And so we're all used as community providers to receive that referral saying, oh, Alethea being discharged tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And you're just like, but it's 2 o'clock on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and tomorrow she's going to be discharged. So we had to get them, sit down with them and say, we will take your patients. We'll take the ones that you want to get to ACT, but it's on a wait list, the ones that, you know, other people are reluctant to take because they're too high risk. We will work with those people, but we want to be able to meet with them first. And if we, again, at the very beginning, this was a grant funded program. So we were able to turn around and say, you know what? That person's perfect for us, but you're discharging tomorrow morning. If you don't keep them, we're not going to be able to come and see them at the hospital, and we will not accept them. And what we gradually saw was a change in the way the hospitals worked with us. And we were getting referrals earlier and earlier so that we did have that opportunity to see them at the hospital. And I think it goes back to a lot of what we've tried to do. Systems can change. We can be very negative and say, oh, that's just the way things are. The hospitals will never change. They're too busy. But if you can form the relationship with the hospital, you can get those hospital staff to work as a partnership with you. And we have great colleagues in the hospital system who want the community supports and are looking for programs like Pathway Home and who are willing to connect with us earlier when they understand that we will respond. And just finally, to make it work, we have to respond. So if they send that referral today, we need to be responding to them by tomorrow saying, yeah, we'll come and see that person. And at first, when Alethea and I started this, we dropped everything to make sure we made it to the hospitals. When the teams got full, we worked with member engagement specialists at CBC because we had to be able to go. If we were saying we want to see them in the hospital, we have to go to the hospital. So
I can add to that, which is that what we've been able to accomplish over the past few years, as sort of Mark indicated, changing a system, is that we've been able to develop really strong relationships with our the hospital systems and our partners that work there. And what we've actually found is that they felt that they were functioning in a silo and that community-based care were functioning in a silo, and that there was an opportunity for us to really get together and talk through how to collaborate. And they were so welcoming to be able to do that. And I'll just give you an example of something, you know, I'm not sure I would have predicted would have happened, but we asked and they were happy to do that, which is one of our hospital partners that Edward and the community access team work with, is that we asked them if we can supply them a list of all the members on the community access Pathway Home team that they can leave in their emergency department. And they were excited to do that. And so they have a list that we refresh periodically that indicates all those members that are part of community access. And if they do show up at that hospital, this is the hospital that they were referred from initially, so they're patients of that hospital, they're known. What they do is that they call the team. And what they continually tell me is that what's amazing is that they call and someone answers. That Edward and his colleagues do answer the phone, and they're very appreciative of that. And so that just sort of reaffirms this relationship. And so we do spend quite a bit of time and energy at CBC and on Pathway Home to develop those relationships, though it's worth every minute because it's really in the service of those members that we serve. Because if we're collaborating as a system, then we are able to really focus in our attention on what the person needs, get the input from the people that know the clients the best, and be able to respond immediately in real time.
Thanks, Barry. So I see another question that came in from Gina, which is, related to COVID actually, and really towards geared towards Alethea and Edward. The question is, as we are taking a step back and not in the community as much, depending upon CMA, have ICL or community access had any success stories or resources that have worked in more remote times? So Edward or Alethea, do either one of you want to jump on that question?
You want to go first, Alethea? Me? I mean, in terms of our team, we haven't stopped. We're socially distanced outdoor PPE engagements. You know, it's necessary. I mean, and it's been very complicated over the months to figure out what's happening from week to week, but we've managed to make it work. I mean, of course, we're utilizing Zoom much more, but we're also finding great success in having small groups outside, you know, meeting in a park. It's going to get tougher as it gets colder, but that's what we've been doing currently.
Wonderful. Oh,
Yeah, and I'd just say, I guess maybe in the height of everything going on when we couldn't go out, that was when, you know, utilizing these RAP dollars and this technology really came in handy, because we were able to, you know, maybe send a set of phones to a given hospital knowing that we're going to get several clients from there. So we have a way to reach someone, because not everyone has access to their own cell phone. And so it's like, how do we make sure that as soon as they're at the hospital, they have someone to talk to? You know, we've had devices sent to people's homes so that we can do Zoom with them. We've, you know, made purchases through Amazon or whatever it is, or Peapod grocery delivery, just to make sure that people have the things that they need. And so that's kind of been hyped up more when it was like really high in COVID. But now that we're slowly going back into the field, like Ed's saying, you know, we are just making sure we're socially distant and making sure that there's safety guidelines for clients as well as staff members. Because, you know, sometimes you'll go out and a client will say, well, I don't feel like wearing a mask, and, you know, I want my staff to stay protected. And it's like, all right, get on that phone and look at them from down the block if you need to, so you can see them. You can still have a conversation, and that way no one's risking, you know, safety in that manner. So again, I think the creativity of Pathway Home is kind of how we get through these times that we're in now.
yeah.
I'd just say on the CBC side of it, the hospitals that we work with most regularly, we shipped up batches of phones, and they agreed in their social work department to hold them. And then when a client was leaving, we would activate them centrally at CBC, so that when they left, they had a smartphone, so that there could be Zoom used and other ways to communicate. I think for me, you know, these are very unique and challenging times. And I think the work that we do at the moment, as Ed said, it's outside. And rightfully so with social distancing stuff. I do worry, just from my past experience, like what might be going on behind the closed doors. Like, is someone's hoarding started again? Is there a rodent problem or infestation? Things that we would have been able to see through observation if we were going into their homes. But some of that, obviously, we don't have that opportunity unless you use your Zoom call to have someone show you around our apartment a little bit.
Yeah.
But I just love the creativity that overall, and the way Pathway Home has really thought out so many done so much troubleshooting on so many of these important issues, so that people can get the services and the support they need. So we have a few more minutes, so we're going to end with one bonus question for all of you. And if anyone else has a question in the meantime, feel free to submit it. But here's my bonus question. How would you improve the model? How has it changed over 6 years? Yeah, how has it changed, and how would you improve it further? Let's do it that way. So who wants to take that one on?
I mean, I could start, and essentially I would say that the more certifications and the more variety we can offer, the better. That's a personal opinion. I mean, I came to the team as a certified yoga instructor. I think that that's been like highly valuable in my work over the last 2 years, to be able to offer yoga, meditation, mindfulness, just an overall wellness thing. You know, I intended to learn sign language. I'm starting that next. It's like whatever notches in those belt, and like the biggest net you can cast, I think is going to be the best one. That's the, if anything was to improve, that's what I would want.
Mark, did you want to jump in?
I'm going to jump in with a little, I suppose, a tweak on your question. I think a little part from my side of the business side of it, and the program, for those of you who are not as familiar, has grown from the 2 pilot programs to 15 teams across the city. A move from serving those just coming from state psychiatric centers to working with people coming from rehab, people coming out of homelessness, people coming from the city hospitals or the Article 28s, wherever you like to call them, to the adult home population. But with that, you know, where the program, when we had a grant funded, there's a lot of flexibility that you can do stuff because you don't have a funder who says you must see this person 4 times or you must complete a care plan within 30 days. So you have an ability to sort of say, I'm going to work with this whole person in a way that we deem best. But as a program grows, different funders come in and they have different requirements. And it becomes harder sometimes to preserve the flexibility that Alethea talked of. And it's ironic because what they want is the model that they've seen the successful outcomes for, but yet they want to come in and then put requirements upon it saying like, well, you must do this and you must do this assessment, you must do that, and you must do it within this time window, which takes away from the team being able to determine where it's best to invest their time based on the particular needs of the individuals. And so as we look to new funders, and particularly ultimately would love to see this funded through managed care because it would give the opportunity for many more teams. And I would love to be able to try and preserve some of the core elements that I think are so critical to making this a unique program, so it just doesn't become a run-of-the-mill care coordination program. And so that's sort of my goal. And I weigh that with the benefit of having the funding from all these programs so we can serve more people, because it needs a lot of people out there who would really benefit from this program.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that's a very tricky balancing act. So thank you for sharing that, Mark. Anyone else want to jump in?
Well, I would say I would second that I would love to see Pathway Home continue to expand to new populations. We're in the process of launching a new team that's going to be working with those that are homeless on the subway system and in the terminals of the MTA. And as we probably all, for those of us that are sort of going around, can see very easily, I'm out in Queens, so I'm on the 2 trains that are quite the longest and tend to attract those that do sleep on the trains. There's a lot of people that need support. I would say that the criminal justice population is certainly a population that I think is underserved and that would benefit as those that are transitioning from a criminal justice setting into the community. And I think there's opportunities to continue to partner. We've had a lot of success partnering with, as Mark just mentioned, the hospitals and the adult homes, in a lot of different systems within the healthcare system. But there are other systems, right? You have the childcare system, you have the police force, you have, so there's many systems that come into contact with people with behavioral health needs, that perhaps if they knew about a Pathway Home service or had access to Pathway Home would really welcome the opportunity to utilize this really service that I'm passionate about, and I think all of us are.
The only thing I'd like to add is just, I think I've seen the evolution of Pathway Home because I've been here since the beginning, and I think that Mark and Barry, to their credit, have worked tirelessly, I gotta say, to bring it from where we were with maybe having 8 people in a room to now having expanded to 15 teams across the city, serving all these different populations. And so just to see, you know, how you can start small and so large and still keep the culture of Pathway Home, which is being flexible and caring about clients and being passionate, is amazing to see. But I just want to thank Mark and Barry for, you know, all their assistance over these last many years.
Thank you, Alethea. It's very sweet of you. And we really stand on the shoulders of the direct care staff that, you know, I feel very fortunate that I've had the opportunity and privilege to, I think across the board, work with so many talented and passionate and dedicated staff. And so, and Alethea, you were here from the very beginning, and Edward a little bit later, and really all the Pathway Home staff have done incredible work, and I'm very proud to represent you and work so closely with you. So thank you all, everyone at Pathway Home.
And on the last note, I'll say, like, I mean, we've been very fortunate with really dedicated staff, and I think that really helps the model. But you know, one thing of growing big and larger is that I don't get to spend as much time with the programs. And back in the early days, for those, we used to eat donuts every Friday morning, and someone would bring them from a specialist bakery. And it was before your time, Ed. I put on a lot of weight, but we used to eat a lot of donuts as we planned the project and how it was going to work. So I'd like to thank the donut makers of Brooklyn for that.
Donuts are great thinking food, that's for sure. So I want to thank all of you so much for being here. Thank you for the incredible work you do with Pathway Home. All of you are doing such a service to the people that you serve and the people that will be served in the future. And I want to thank all of our participants today for being here. And I just want to let everyone know that this panel was recorded. So in case you want to share it with other people, I'd be happy to share the recording with you all. And I will put my email in the chat box as soon as I stop the recording. So thank you everyone for being here, and have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.